They say you should never reveal all your cards at once. For 8 long years, I've lived by that rule, letting everyone think I was a struggling nobody. Even my wife Emily, the woman I thought I loved, had no idea who I really was. That night, sitting on the corner of our leather sectional, sipping water like I didn't have a care in the world, I let them laugh. Emily, with her flawless curls and that gleaming pearl necklace I bought her, was in her element. She loved playing hostess, especially to her circle of friends. Well, I called them her entourage. They were the type who'd wear designer dresses to a backyard barbecue just to outshine one another. And tonight, they'd found their entertainment for the evening, me. Daniel, sweetheart, Emily cooed, her tone syrupy sweet but laced with venom. Why don't you tell them about your latest job hunt? The room erupted in laughter before I could even open my mouth. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, used me as the punchline to her jokes. But tonight, she was really going for it. Maybe the new champagne had given her courage. Her best friend Jessica chimed in next. Honestly, Emily, you're so patient. If my husband couldn't hold a steady job, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, it's not like Daniel's even trying, right? She gave me a look that could cut glass, and I forced a weak smile. That's the thing about playing a role, you have to commit, even when it stings. Inside, I wanted to laugh in their faces. To tell Jessica that her position as head of marketing existed because of me. I could see the resignation letter sitting in my drafts folder with her name on it. But I didn't, not yet. Emily leaned back, swirling her wine. Oh Jessica, don't be too hard on him. At least he knows his way around the kitchen. The man makes a mean spaghetti. And someone has to do the dishes around here. More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, their chuckles bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of the house I paid for, the house they thought belonged to Emily, courtesy of her supposed financial contributions. Funny how none of them noticed the cracks in her story. Did they really believe her part-time charity work funded this marble-floored palace? Or the luxury cars parked outside? No, but they believed what they wanted to believe. Because it was easier, and I let them. Emily wasn't done yet. Remember that one time Daniel thought he could be a consultant? Oh darling, you spent months preparing for that interview, didn't you? What was the company called again? Oh right, Summit Innovations. They didn't even call you back. She erupted into laughter, clutching her sides like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That one hit close. She didn't know it, but that interview wasn't what she thought it had been. My managers were supposed to be doing their jobs. That day, I sat across from my own hiring team, silently judging them while they judged me. It was my way of keeping things in check. And now my own wife had turned that into a joke. The rest of the night passed in a blur of cruel remarks, shared glances and clinking glasses. They didn't see the way my grip tightened around my drink or notice the fire building behind my calm expression. That's the funny thing about people like them. They assume the quiet ones are weak. But weakness isn't silence. Weakness is thinking your throne is secure when it's built on lies. Eventually, Emily waved me off to the kitchen. Be a dear and get us another bottle, won't you? I stood and did as she asked, my face a mask of quiet submission. But as I walked away, I caught the words she whispered to Jessica. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. A man without ambition is just. Embarrassing. Embarrassing. That's what she called me. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Tonight wasn't about reacting, it was about remembering. Every word they said, every laugh they shared, it was all fuel for what was to come. As I stood in the kitchen, uncorking another bottle of champagne I bought, I glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Less than 12 hours until the board meeting. Less than 12 hours until their world came crashing down. Let them laugh tonight, I thought. Because tomorrow, none of them would have anything to laugh about. I returned to the living room, placing the bottle on the coffee table like a dutiful husband. Emily barely acknowledged me, too busy telling the room about her latest spa day. I sat back down, taking my place in the corner. Invisible, insignificant, in their eyes, but inside, I was smiling. Let them mock me, let them think I'm nothing. Because when the clock struck 9 the next morning, they'd learn the truth. The man they belittled wasn't just their equal. He was their boss. It wasn't the first time Emily had embarrassed me in front of her friends, but this night was a masterpiece of cruelty. She wasn't just hosting, she was putting on a show. Every smile, every joke, every exaggerated story was designed to put her on a pedestal and me 6 feet under. Jessica, she began, swirling her wine like she was born holding a glass of vintage, you should have seen Daniel last month. He came home so excited, he thought he'd found the perfect job listing. She leaned forward like she was sharing some scandalous secret. He spent 3 hours on the application, pouring his heart and soul into it. And guess what? She paused, grinning like a Cheshire cat. They didn't even bother sending him a rejection email. The room erupted in laughter. I sat there, my face a carefully composed mask, nodding along like I was part of the joke. Inside, I was calculating. Every laugh, every insult. This wasn't just about me anymore. Emily's friends were executives, middle management and department heads at my company. The very people who prided themselves on being at the top, blind to the fact that their careers hung on the decisions of the man they were mocking. Emily was relentless. She crossed her legs, flashing the Louboutins I bought her, and gestured dramatically. Honestly, I've tried everything to help him. You know, I even suggested he try barista work at the cafe down the street? At least he'd get tips. More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, clinking their glasses in agreement. For a moment, I considered saying something. I could have told them that cafe was one of many businesses I'd acquired under a shell company. That the very job she mocked was in a building I owned. But I stayed quiet. Timing was everything, and tonight wasn't the night to shatter their illusions. Emily's smile widened as she turned her attention back to me. What do you think, Daniel? Maybe you should listen to me for once? Her tone dripped with condescension, as if I were a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. Maybe you're right, I'll look into it. She wasn't expecting that. I could see it in her eyes. She thrived on conflict, loved it when I pushed back just enough to make myself look defensive. But giving her nothing threw her off. Still, she recovered quickly, tossing her hair over her shoulder like a queen dismissing a servant. Good, it's about time. I sipped my water, letting her have the last word. Let her believe she'd won. The truth was, she'd been losing for years, she just didn't know it yet. As the night wore on, Emily's arrogance only grew. She bragged about her charity work, making sure everyone knew she was the backbone of the family. It's not easy being the only breadwinner, she said, her voice heavy with false humility. But someone has to keep the lights on, right? It took every ounce of restraint not to laugh out loud. The mortgage was paid off years ago. The cars, paid in full. Every single luxury she flaunted to her friends was courtesy of my money, funneled through accounts she didn't even know existed. But to her, I was just the man who couldn't land a job. The irony was almost too good. Emily's friend Angela leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on Emily's knee. Honestly, babe, you're a saint for putting up with it. If my husband were that useless, I'd have left him ages ago. Emily sighed dramatically, as if she were carrying the weight of the world. Oh, believe me, I've thought about it. But then I remind myself, I married for love, not ambition. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. Love? Was that what she called it? Because from where I stood, her love looked a lot like opportunism. She'd married me thinking I was a stepping stone, a man she could mold into the kind of success she could take credit for. But when I didn't fit the mold, she turned me into a project, something to fix, or worse, pity. The night dragged on, each conversation more insufferable than the last. They talked about luxury vacations, designer brands, and the importance of networking. I sat there nodding along, my presence barely acknowledged unless it was to set up the next joke at my expense. Daniel, why don't you grab us another bottle of champagne? Emily asked sweetly, her smile as sharp as a blade. You know where it is. Right in the wine fridge I bought. The room erupted into another round of laughter. I stood, nodding politely, and headed to the kitchen, my fists clenched as I reached for the bottle. But I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't the time to react, this was the time to plan. As I uncorked the champagne, I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m. In less than 12 hours, the same people who mocked me tonight would walk into my office, completely unaware that their fates were already sealed. Emily would wake up in a house she no longer controlled, her circle of friends decimated. And I'd finally step out of the shadows. I returned to the living room, placing the champagne on the table without a word. Emily didn't even look at me. She was too busy holding court, basking in the glow of her imagined superiority. For a moment, I considered walking away, heading upstairs and letting them have their fun. But no, I stayed, I watched, I listened. Every word, every insult, every smug laugh was another nail in the coffin of their delusions. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was powerless. But tomorrow, they'd learn the truth. The man they underestimated wasn't just their equal, he was their boss. And he was done playing nice. They didn't know it, but every laugh, every insult, every sideways glance they threw my way that night was fuel for what I had been preparing for years. The power I held wasn't in flashy displays or loud declarations. It was in patience, in knowing exactly when to strike. I learned that lesson the hard way long before I ever met Emily. 12 years ago, I was a different man. Back then, I didn't know what it felt like to be underestimated. I was young, ambitious, and full of hope. My father ran a small electronics business, a family legacy he poured everything into. We weren't wealthy, but we were proud. That pride crumbled the day corporate raiders came in, bought the business for pennies, and dismantled it overnight. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when they shut the doors for good. It wasn't just a business they took, it was his life's work. That moment shaped me. I swore I'd never let anyone take from me what they took from my father. I would build something unshakable, something untouchable. And I did. Summit Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in my tiny apartment where I worked around the clock, teaching myself coding, business strategy, and finance. I started with small contracts, fixing software bugs for local companies, and used every dollar earned to reinvest in my dream. By the time I turned 28, Summit wasn't just growing, it was exploding. What began as late-night coding sessions in my studio apartment had transformed into an empire swallowing competitors whole. At 30, we were the Silicon Valley powerhouse every VC begged to fund. By 35, we weren't just leading the industry, we were rewriting its rules across 3 continents. But success attracts more than investors, it draws vultures in designer suits. I'd watched 3 relationships implode before Emily. Each followed the same sickening pattern: wide-eyed admiration morphing into entitlement, then resentment when they realized my ambition wasn't their personal ATM. So when our paths crossed at that charity gala, I made a calculated decision. The irony still burns. That very afternoon, I'd closed a $47 million acquisition, yet I arrived in a 5-year-old suit, driving a Honda with peeling clear coat. Emily spotted me across the champagne tower, her emerald dress catching the light like liquid envy. She was stunning, yes, but it was her performance that hooked me. The way she leaned in when introduced to Daniel Wright, freelance consultant, her manicured fingers brushing my sleeve as she murmured, "You'll find your footing. Just keep pushing." For 12 months, I let myself believe the act. Through vineyard picnics where she brought homemade charcuterie boards never knowing I owned the vineyard, through whispered promises in borrowed beach houses deeded to my Delaware LLC. When I slid the ring on her finger, a modest 1 carat to maintain the facade, I almost convinced myself this time was different. The housewarming was our first unraveling. I'd purchased the Brentwood estate outright but let Emily believe we qualified for the mortgage together. Set up monthly transfers to her account so she could split expenses. Watched her face flush with pride writing those checks, never suspecting the accounts fed from my shadow subsidiaries. The transformation came gradually. First, it was helpful suggestions about my career over breakfast. Then concerned remarks to friends about my lack of direction. Within a year, her encouragement curdled into open contempt, especially when an audience gathered. I catalogued every shift. The way her French manicure would tap impatiently when mentioning my failed projects, how she'd sigh dramatically while accidentally forwarding HR job listings. What she never grasped, every indulgence was a leash. That girl's trip to Bora Bora? Charged to Summit's offshore event planning subsidiary. The Mercedes G-Wagon she surprised me with? Registered to our Shell property management firm. Even her precious charity committee seats were purchased through donor networks I controlled. The real masterpiece? Her entire social circle, Jessica not Melissa, we're Americanizing, didn't just head marketing. She reported to an SVP who reported to a division head who answered directly to my silent voting shares. Every promotion her friends toasted over Veuve Clicquot, every big win they humble bragged about? Pre-scripted moves in a game where I held every card. Tonight's champagne-fueled ridicule? Merely Act 5 in a play whose finale I'd storyboarded years ago. As Emily's laughter echoes through my custom-designed living room, I watch the grandfather clock tick toward 9 a.m. 12 hours until the boardroom doors lock. 12 hours until Jessica's termination notice auto-sends, until the LLC holding Emily's jewelry collection dissolves, until every bank account she's ever touched freezes solid. The vultures always forget, the quietest predator controls the hunt. I didn't just build Summit Innovations, I weaponized it. Every department, every subsidiary, every smiling executive in this room moved according to designs I drafted years ago. They were chess pieces on a board they couldn't even see, while Sophia and her vipers laughed themselves hoarse at the king they mistook for a pawn. As their champagne-fueled ridicule washed over me, I mentally cataloged the evidence waiting in my study upstairs. Security footage from last year's holiday party showing Jessica snorting cocaine in the executive bathroom. Expense reports documenting Angela's business trips to Cabo with her junior analyst. Audio recordings of 3 VPs discussing how to cook their division's books. They strutted through their gilded cages, oblivious that every lock had my fingerprints on it. Daniel, are you even listening? Sophia's voice cut through my thoughts, dripping with saccharine malice. She twirled her empty flute between manicured fingers. Honestly, I don't know how you expect to get anywhere if you're always daydreaming. I offered the smile I'd perfected during boardroom coups, all teeth, no warmth. You're right, I should focus more. The irony tasted better than the Dom Perignon they were guzzling. While they saw a failure sagging against the furniture, I was the architect of their careers, their lifestyles, their impending ruin. Tomorrow, when I strode into Summit's headquarters not as Sophia's pathetic husband but as the majority shareholder they'd never met, their carefully constructed reality would detonate. True power doesn't roar, it observes. It notes how Melissa's left eye twitches when she lies. It remembers Angela's trembling hands when HR audits loom. It waits until the moment their arrogance peaks. Then it strikes. The champagne bottle grew damp in my grip as Sophia delivered her coup de grace. I don't know how much longer I can tolerate this marriage. Her voice carried like a courtroom verdict. I mean, I love him, but love doesn't pay the bills. I feel like I'm raising a grown child. Her coven erupted in performative gasps. Jessica clutched Sophia's wrist like a bad soap opera actress. You're so strong. I keep telling her she deserves someone ambitious. The glass neck creaked in my fist. Every insult, every condescending head tilt over these years hadn't weakened me. They'd forged me into something far more dangerous than these sycophants could comprehend. Daniel, Sophia's nails clicked against crystal. Are you just going to stand there? Bring it here already. I crossed the room with measured steps, placing the bottle precisely at the center of the coffee table. Sorry to keep you waiting. Of course you are, she sneered, already reaching past me. You always are. That was it. As I straightened, my gaze swept over these parasites. Their designer dresses bought with my dividends, their smug smiles funded by my silence. Not one met my eyes. Why would they? To them, I was furniture. But tomorrow? Tomorrow they'd see the god behind the curtain. Unworthy of acknowledgement. But tomorrow? Tomorrow they'd be looking at me. Really looking at me. For the first time. I'm going upstairs, I said, my voice calm, measured. Big day tomorrow. Emily didn't even glance up from her wine glass. Good luck with that, she sneered, already turning back to Jessica. Maybe this time he'll land something. The words should have stung. But I didn't let it show. I walked upstairs to the study, closing the door softly behind me. The sound of their laughter followed me, sharp, mocking, relentless, but I blocked it out. I had more important things to focus on. Inside the study, I locked the door and sat at my desk, exhaling slowly. The calm facade I'd worn all night faded away, replaced by the cold, razor-edged determination that had driven me for years. I reached for the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, revealing my secure workspace. 3 monitors flickered to life, bathing the room in an eerie blue glow. Left screen. Live feeds from Summit's security cameras, boardrooms, hallways, even private offices. Center. Financial reports, flagged transactions, offshore account movements. Right. Personal dossiers on Emily and her so-called friends. Every secret, every lie, all documented. Jessica, head of marketing, her department's event planning budget had funded more than corporate retreats. Lavish vacations in the Maldives. Personal shopping sprees at Bergdorf Goodman. Even a down payment on a Tesla Model X. The receipts in my files told the real story, every fraudulent dollar, every forged invoice. Angela, head of HR, she'd built her career on burying scandals. Harassment complaints? Silenced with NDAs. Whistleblowers? Forced resignations. Her emails, intercepted and archived, were a masterclass in corporate intimidation. You'll never work in this industry again. Classic. The husband's Greg, VP of sales, inflated quarterly numbers to trigger his 6-figure bonuses. Scott, operations, leaked proprietary designs to competitors for a cut of the profits. And then there was Emily, my wife, the woman who claimed to carry our marriage. She didn't work for Summit directly, but she'd benefited from it more than anyone. Charity galas, funded by my offshore accounts. Designer wardrobe, charged to my shadow LLCs. Her generous donations, all a tax write-off for my company. But the real betrayal wasn't the money. It was the messages on my right monitor. Flirty texts, hotel confirmations, weekend getaways with a man whose face I recognized, a junior partner at Summit's biggest law firm. She thought I didn't know. She thought I was too blind, too weak to see. I leaned back, staring at the screens. The weight of it all, the lies, the manipulation, the years of mockery, should have crushed me. Instead, I felt clarity. Tomorrow wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming the life and the company I'd built from nothing. Emily and her pack of hyenas had spent years tearing others down, using their power to enrich themselves. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. I grabbed my phone, typing a message to Sarah, my most trusted executive, and one of the few who knew the truth about me. Everything is in place for tomorrow. Be ready. Her reply came instantly. All set. They won't see it coming. I shut the monitors off, plunging the room into silence. Downstairs, the laughter continued, Emily's shrill voice rising above the rest. Let them laugh. Tomorrow, the laughing would stop. The morning of the reckoning, 6 a.m. The house was silent. I dressed in a custom navy Tom Ford suit, one of the few indulgences I kept hidden for occasions like this. Emily was still asleep, sprawled across the bed with the careless confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. Today, I'd prove her wrong. The Blacktown car waited outside. Charles, my driver of 10 years, gave me a rare look of curiosity as I slid into the back seat. Summit headquarters, I said. The city blurred past as my phone buzzed. Sarah again. Boardroom ready. Security briefed. Legal on standby. I didn't need luck. I had leverage. The arrival. I entered through the private underground garage, bypassing the main lobby entirely. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. In 15 minutes, they'd all be here. In 30, their careers would be over. In an hour, Emily would realize everything she'd mocked, every joke, every insult, had been her last mistake. The executives thought they were running the show. Today, I proved them wrong. Sarah was waiting in the security office, her fingers flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously. She handed me a visitor's badge with a smirk. Angela Martinez it read, the same alias I'd used when touring our Shanghai office last year. Everything's set, she said, nodding toward the bank of monitors displaying live feeds from across the building. Your wife's inner circle arrived 20 minutes ago. Morning stand-ups just wrapped up. I watched the screens as Jessica strutted into frame, her $3,000 Valentino heels clicking against the marble lobby floor while she barked orders into her phone. Vanessa followed, pausing to flash the receptionist a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Greg and Scott entered together, still laughing about their golf game at Pebble Beach, the one they'd expensed as a client development opportunity. They moved through their morning routines with the casual arrogance of people who believed themselves untouchable. Make sure security knows not to intervene, I instructed, adjusting the cheap glasses that completed my disguise. I want this to play out exactly as we planned. Sarah nodded. Understood. What about Emily? My fingers twitched at the mention of her name. She wasn't part of today's corporate takedown, not directly. But what I had planned for her would be far more. Personal. She'll know soon enough, I said, pushing the thought aside. Let's focus on the main event. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I took position in the lobby disguised as a mid-level job candidate, flipping through Summit's annual report with exaggerated nervousness. The beauty of corporate invisibility? No one looks twice at another desperate applicant. Phase 1. The interview charade. Thomas from HR greeted me with the disinterested smile of someone going through the motions. This'll be quick, he said, leading me to a sterile conference room. Just some basic skills assessments first. The test was laughably simple, Excel functions a high school intern could master. I intentionally fumbled pivot tables I'd invented, misformatted cells with the clumsiness of someone who'd never touched a spreadsheet. Through the glass walls, I watched Jessica pause outside, her nose wrinkling at the spectacle of corporate incompetence. Thomas reviewed my work with barely concealed disdain. Well, he drawled, this is something. Let's proceed to the panel interview. The 3 managers across from me might as well have brought lunch to my execution. They fired off rote questions while checking phones, their boredom palpable. When the balding one in the middle actually yawned during my answer about career aspirations, I had to suppress a smile. The culture they'd cultivated wasn't just toxic, it was a perfect mirror of their own rot. Phase 2. The reckoning. At 10:15 a.m., I approached the executive conference room, their laughter spilling into the hallway. You should have seen her during the coding test, Jessica was saying between sips of matcha latte. Like watching a monkey with a typewriter. Vanessa's reply dripped with faux sympathy. HR really needs to screen these people better. Where do they even find them? I let the door click shut behind me. The silence was instantaneous. 7 pairs of eyes locked onto me, first with irritation, then confusion, then dawning horror as recognition set in. Actually, I said, moving to the head of the table, I think it's time we had an honest conversation. Jessica recovered first. Who the hell are you? Security. I remained standing, placing both palms on the polished mahogany. I'm Daniel Carter, founder and CEO of Summit Innovations. And as of this morning, your employer. The blood drained from Vanessa's face so completely I thought she might faint. Greg's mouth worked soundlessly like a landed fish. Scott, usually the loudest, had gone preternaturally still. I tapped my phone. The monitors came alive with damning evidence. Security footage of Jessica snorting cocaine in the executive bathroom during last year's holiday party. Vanessa's emails threatening to end careers of harassment complainants. Greg's falsified sales reports from Q2 that had earned him a $250,000 bonus. Scott's Venmo transactions from a competitor's VP with memo lines reading for the specs you've spent years believing this was your kingdom, I continued, watching comprehension dawn. But every policy you've circumvented, every dollar you've stolen, every person you've stepped on, I've been watching. Jessica found her voice first. This is insane. You're telling us you've been. What? Some secret CEO this whole time? I brought up Summit's original incorporation documents on the main screen, zooming in on my signature. Not secret, just selective about when to make my presence known. Vanessa tried a new tactic. Daniel, Mr. Carter, surely we can discuss this like adults. There must be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I interrupted, was yours. That loyalty could be bought. That ethics were negotiable. That I wouldn't notice when you turned my company into your personal ATM. I tapped my phone again. 7 resignation letters appeared on screen, pre-signed and notarized. You have exactly 90 seconds to sign these before I forward today's evidence to the SEC, the press, and every board member's personal inbox. The room erupted in panicked protests. Greg actually grabbed at his chest. Jessica's perfect manicure clicked frantically against the table. And outside the window, unbeknownst to them, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Right on schedule, Emily had arrived. I've always respected you, I mean, the company, and if there's anything we can do to fix this. I cut Angela off with a cold smile. Fix it? Angela, you've spent years burying complaints, silencing employees, and fostering a toxic culture. You didn't respect anything except your own comfort. Melissa, ever the opportunist, leaned forward, her tone pleading. Daniel, we didn't know. If we'd known, we never would have mocked me, I said, my voice rising slightly. Laughed at me? Treated me like dirt in my own house? I stood, planting my hands firmly on the table. Ignorance isn't an excuse. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You thought I was beneath you, and now you'll face the consequences. I tapped my phone one last time, and the screen behind me changed again, this time displaying their termination letters, each one signed and dated effective immediately. You're all fired. Your access to company accounts and systems has been revoked. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises. No. No, Greg muttered, shaking his head. You can't do this. I locked eyes with him. I just did. Angela stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. This is outrageous. We'll sue. You what? I snapped, cutting her off. Sue me for firing you with cause? For exposing the fraud, the theft, the harassment you've swept under the rug? Be my guest, Angela. But I promise you, I have more evidence than you have excuses. The door opened, and 2 security guards stepped inside. Take them to HR for their exit interviews, I said, my tone icy. Make sure they understand the terms of their severance, or lack thereof. One by one, they stood, their confidence shattered. Melissa glared at me as if her anger could undo everything. Angela looked like she was holding back tears. Greg and Scott shuffled out without a word, their heads hanging low. Just as they reached the door, I called out, "Oh, and one more thing." They turned to face me, hope flickering in their eyes. Don't bother reaching out to competitors. Your non-compete agreements are still in effect. And trust me, I'll be watching. The guards escorted them out, and the door closed behind them with a satisfying finality. For a moment, the room was silent again. I let out a slow breath, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Sarah entered moments later, her tablet in hand. Well, she said, her tone neutral but her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. That went about as expected. Good, I replied, straightening my suit. Now let's prepare for the board meeting. There's still work to do. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't just the man behind the scenes. I was Daniel Carter, CEO of Summit Innovations, and I had just reminded them all exactly who I was. I don't think anyone truly understands the satisfaction of watching the mighty fall until it's their hand holding the lever. As I walked back to my private office, I replayed the looks on their faces in my mind: Melissa, Angela, Greg, Scott. They thought they were invincible, untouchable, but I'd torn away their illusions in a matter of minutes. And now, it was time for the aftermath. Sarah was already waiting for me when I arrived, her tablet filled with updates and reports. The termination process is underway, she said, her tone brisk but professional. HR is processing their files, and security is clearing their offices. Melissa tried to call someone from the marketing team on her way out, but we've already disabled her phone and email access. I nodded, sitting behind my desk. Good, make sure all communications are monitored. I don't want any attempts to leak information or contact clients. Already done, Sarah replied. And one more thing. Angela demanded to see the board before she left. She claims she's being wrongfully terminated. I smirked, leaning back in my chair. Wrongful termination? Angela covered up harassment cases, manipulated HR records, and created a culture of fear. Let her try to spin that. I doubt the board will be sympathetic. Sarah smiled faintly, a rare crack in her usually stoic demeanor. I didn't think so, but I figured I'd let you know. By noon, the fallout was well underway. Security cameras showed Melissa pacing the parking lot, shouting into her phone. Greg sat slumped on the curb, staring at the ground. Scott had already left, his face pale and his shoulders hunched as he walked toward his car. Angela, of course, had been escorted out kicking and screaming, her righteous indignation falling on deaf ears. It was a fitting end for people who had spent years wielding their power to tear others down. And the best part? They still didn't fully understand the scope of what I had done. I pulled up my laptop and opened the live feeds from their exit interviews, each one being recorded, of course, for legal purposes. Melissa sat across from the HR representative, her voice tight with anger as she tried to negotiate her severance. This is ridiculous, she said, slamming her hand on the table. I've been with this company for years. You can't just fire me. The HR representative didn't flinch. Your termination is for cause. Per your contract, you forfeit severance and stock options under these circumstances. The documentation is all here. Melissa's face turned red as she flipped through the file in front of her. This is absurd. Cause? What cause? Fraudulent expense reports, the representative said, her voice steady. Unauthorized use of company funds. Gross misconduct. Melissa leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. This isn't over, she muttered. Oh, but it was. Greg's interview was next. He didn't argue as much as Melissa, but his desperation was just as evident. Look, I know I've made mistakes, he said, his voice low. But you don't have to do this. I've got a family to support. The HR representative gave him the same calm explanation. Your termination is for cause. You will not receive severance or stock options. He hung his head, muttering under his breath, this can't be happening. Angela was the last. True to form, she came in swinging. This is discrimination, she shouted, pointing a finger at the HR representative. You can't do this to me. I've done nothing wrong. The representative remained unfazed. We have extensive documentation of your actions, including emails, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies. You were complicit in covering up harassment complaints and retaliating against employees who came forward. That is grounds for immediate termination. Angela sputtered, her indignation turning into disbelief. I want to speak to Daniel. The representative glanced at the camera, then back at Angela. Mr. Carter has already approved this termination. The decision is final. By the time their interviews were over, their access had been revoked, their emails archived, and their personal belongings packed up and delivered to their cars. Sarah confirmed the process had gone smoothly. They're officially out, she said, placing her tablet on my desk. The office feels lighter already. I smiled. It's amazing how much dead weight can drag a place down. But the day wasn't over yet. There was still one more person who needed to face the consequences: Emily. At 1:30 p.m., just as I was reviewing the final reports from HR, my phone buzzed. It was Emily, her name flashing on the screen. The sight brought a mix of emotions: anger, disappointment, and, oddly enough, relief. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I let it ring for a few seconds before answering. "Hello, Emily." "Daniel," she snapped, her voice sharp and impatient. "What the hell is going on?" "Melissa just called me. She said you fired her and half the executive team." "Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," I said calmly. "Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott were all terminated this morning. It was a long time coming." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "You can't do that," she said finally, her voice trembling. "They're your employees. My friends. You had no right." "No right?" I leaned back in my chair, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at my lips. "Emily, I own the company. I have every right." Her sharp intake of breath was almost satisfying. What are you talking about? For 8 years, I've let you believe I was just some aimless, unemployed husband. But the truth is, I built Summit Innovations from the ground up. Every decision, every success, every dollar you've spent, it all came from me. And now, I've finally taken out the trash." "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No," I said coldly. "You lied to yourself. And now, you're about to see what happens when the truth finally comes out." I hung up, leaving her in stunned silence. There was more to say, much more, but that conversation could wait. For now, I had a company to run. When Emily stormed into the Summit Innovations headquarters later that afternoon, the receptionist didn't even have time to stop her. She marched past the front desk and headed straight for the executive suite, her heels clicking angrily against the polished floors. I was waiting for her, seated calmly at my desk, reviewing the final files from the day's terminations. The door burst open, and there she was, my wife, looking every bit the picture of indignation. Her perfectly styled hair, her designer handbag swinging in her hand, and the fury in her eyes might have intimidated someone else. "Not me, Daniel," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. "What in the world is going on?" I didn't look up immediately. I took my time finishing the last line of a report before closing the folder and setting it neatly on my desk. When I finally met her gaze, I spoke with deliberate calmness. "Good afternoon, Emily. What brings you here?" "What brings me here?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I just got a call from Melissa, crying hysterically, telling me you fired her and Angela and Greg and Scott." "You've lost your mind." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Have I? Or have I finally decided to clean up the mess they've made of my company?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the words. "Your company?" she scoffed, shaking her head. "What are you talking about? Summit isn't yours." "It is," I said, my voice steady. "It always has been." For a moment, she was silent, the weight of my statement sinking in. Then she laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to, what? Scare me? Humiliate me?" I stood, walking around the desk and stopping just a few feet from her. "Do you remember the house we live in, Emily? The one you've always called our home? I paid for it outright. And the cars? The trips? The charity galas you thought your part-time work covered? No. Every luxury you've ever flaunted was funded by Summit Innovations. My company." Her face paled, and her hand tightened around her handbag. "You're lying." "Am I?" I walked back to my desk and tapped a button on my laptop. The monitor on the wall behind me lit up, displaying the incorporation documents for Summit Innovations, complete with my name as founder and CEO. "You've been living off my success for years, Emily. And while you were busy mocking me, I was busy building an empire." She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. You lied to me," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't lie," I said coldly. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe. You saw what you wanted to see, a man you could pity, control, and belittle. You never once stopped to question why everything seemed to come so easily. Why the bills were always paid, or why your lifestyle never matched what you thought we could afford. You never cared enough to dig deeper." Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of anger. "You humiliated me in front of my friends. You destroyed them." I raised an eyebrow. "Destroyed them?" "No, Emily. They destroyed themselves. Melissa was stealing from the company. Angela covered up harassment complaints. Greg falsified sales figures. And Scott leaked proprietary information to competitors. They weren't your friends. They were parasites. Just like you." The word hit her like a slap, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she straightened her spine, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. You've gone too far, Daniel, she said, her voice icy. You think you can just humiliate me like this? You'll regret it. I let out a short laugh. Regret it? Emily, for years, I've endured your mockery, your condescension, and your utter lack of respect. You made me the punchline of your jokes, parading me around as a failure while you basked in a life I built. The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. Her anger boiled over then. You can't do this to me, she hissed. We're married, I'm entitled to half of everything. I walked back to my desk, opened another folder, and pulled out a stack of papers. I placed them on the table between us and slid them toward her. That's where you're wrong. You signed a prenuptial agreement when we got married. It ensures that everything I built before and during our marriage remains mine. Your entitlement ends today. She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You're divorcing me, she whispered. I am, I said without hesitation. And before you even think about contesting it, know this. I've already spoken to the best divorce attorneys in the city. None of them will take your case. Your access to the joint account has been revoked, and your spending spree stops now. Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation set in. Daniel, please, she said, her voice breaking. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it, your crocodile tears won't work on me anymore, Emily. For years, I gave you everything, more than you deserved, and you repaid me with mockery and betrayal. I'm done. She stood there, stunned and silent, as I opened the door. Security will escort you out, I said, motioning to the 2 guards waiting outside. Take whatever dignity you have left and leave. Daniel, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean, goodbye, Emily, I said, turning back to my desk. And good luck, you'll need it. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was free, from her manipulations, her lies, and her cruelty. I had reclaimed my life, my company, and my self-respect. Emily's downfall wasn't just the end of a toxic marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter for me. And as I sat back in my chair, watching the sun set over the city skyline, I knew that this was only the start. The aftermath. The day after Emily's departure, the atmosphere at Summit Innovations was electric. The toxic fog that had lingered for years was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. As I walked into the office that morning, employees stopped to greet me, not with the stiff politeness reserved for their supposed CEO's husband, but with genuine smiles and nods of respect. For the first time, they were seeing me for who I truly was. The man who had built this company from nothing. Sarah met me at my office, her ever-present tablet in hand. We finalized the reorganization plans, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. The departments affected by Jessica, Vanessa, Greg, and Scott are already seeing improvements. Productivity is up 25% in some areas. Good, I replied, taking the tablet from her and scanning the data. What about the employees who left because of them? Any word? We've reached out to everyone who filed complaints or resigned due to harassment or discrimination, Sarah said. 12 have already accepted reinstatement offers. The others are considering it. Make sure they know they'll be walking into a very different environment, I said. I want them to feel safe here. Valued. Sarah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Understood. A new beginning. That afternoon, I held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium, a first for me. For years, I had avoided the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes. But now, it was time to step forward and address the people who had kept Summit Innovations running, even under the shadow of corruption. As I stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. I gripped the edges of the podium, taking a moment to steady myself before speaking. Good afternoon, I began, my voice carrying easily through the microphone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Summit Innovations. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, but I continued. Over the past several years, I've stayed in the background, observing how this company has grown and changed. And while I've seen incredible talent and innovation, I've also seen things that deeply disappointed me. A culture of fear, favoritism, and dishonesty took root here, and I take responsibility for not addressing it sooner. The room was completely silent now, every pair of eyes fixed on me. But that ends today, I said firmly. The people responsible for that culture are gone. And moving forward, this company will be a place where everyone, regardless of their position, feels valued, respected, and empowered. I outlined our new initiatives: anonymous feedback channels, enhanced HR protocols, and mentorship programs for employees who wanted to grow within the company. I spoke about accountability and collaboration, about building a culture of trust and innovation. And when I finished, the room erupted into applause. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not just of what I had built, but of what it was becoming. The transformation. Over the next few months, the transformation was remarkable. Departments that had been bogged down by inefficiency and favoritism began to thrive. Jennifer, a brilliant programmer who had left after being sidelined by Jessica, returned to lead our new AI division. Under her leadership, we filed 5 patents in 6 months, more than the company had in the past 3 years. The Thompson account, one of our largest clients, doubled their contract with us, citing our new leadership and transparency initiatives as key factors. Other clients followed suit, and our revenue soared. But the most rewarding part wasn't the financial success, it was seeing the employees flourish. People who had once been afraid to speak up now shared ideas openly. Collaboration replaced competition, and for the first time, Summit Innovations felt like the company I had always envisioned. The downfall of the unworthy. As for Emily and her friends, their downfall was swift and brutal. The evidence I had gathered against them was airtight, leaving no room for retaliation. Jessica and Vanessa's reputations were in tatters, their misconduct exposed to every potential employer. Greg and Scott faced lawsuits for fraud and breach of contract, their careers effectively over. Emily, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. She moved out of the house within a week of our confrontation, her pride too wounded to fight me in court. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the ironclad prenuptial agreement. I later heard she was staying with her sister, trying to piece together a life that didn't revolve around appearances and materialism. For a while, I thought about her often, not with anger, but with a strange sense of relief. In the end, she had done me a favor. Her betrayal had forced me to confront the cracks in my life and take back control. And for that, I was grateful. A new dawn. 6 months after the shakeup, I stood in my office, looking out over the city. The skyline was painted in hues of gold and orange as the sun set, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Sarah knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. "Final numbers are in," she said, handing me a report. "Profits are up 60%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. And the mentorship program has a waiting list." I smiled, setting the report down. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when you get rid of the dead weight." Sarah chuckled softly. "There's one more thing," she said. "The press is still asking for an interview. They want to know how you managed to pull off such a perfect transformation." I shook my head. "Let the results speak for themselves. I'm not interested in publicity." She nodded, turning to leave but paused at the door. "Any regrets?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. I thought about it for a moment. About Emily's mockery, the betrayal of her friends, and the years I had spent hiding in the shadows. But then I thought about the company we had rebuilt, the people who were thriving, and the future that lay ahead. "No," I said finally. "No regrets, just lessons." In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying what was broken. It was about rebuilding something better. And as I stood there, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, I knew that Summit Innovations wasn't just a company anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the power of starting over. And I was ready for whatever came next.